lapel choke from mount is one of my very favorite submissions. I learned it from my instructor, Roger Gracie, and if you've watched the world champs for the last few years, you can see that he's dominated using this technique. He's choked pretty much everyone out using this super simple finish from the mount. During the early part of my jiu-jitsu career, I used to try to do the mount choke, but as I'm sure you guys have experienced as well, I always used to get rolled off. So eventually I just stopped using it. I was like, oh, it's too difficult to do. And I stumbled upon one of the details which stops that from happening. And since then, I've had a lot of success using this technique. If you follow the simple formula, I'm sure you'll tap out a lot of guys using this. A couple of tips from the mount position. Before we even attempt to finish our opponent from here, we need to know how to hold the mount position correctly. So two little details that will make a big difference are, firstly, you want to make sure that the soles of your feet are always tucked in. Right, no matter how high or low you are in mount, keep your feet tucked in against his body. All right, that's really important. So if you're doing this, you're making a mistake. The second thing, this is something I learned from Mauricio Gomez, he's a red and black belt. The guy weighs like 105 kilos. When he does this to you, rarely feel it. But even lighter people, when they use this little principle, they can make themselves feel a lot heavier on top. What you want to do in mount position is widen your knees ever so slightly, breathe out, and relax your body into your opponent. So you really want to sit on him. You don't want your weight to be taken on the knees, because not only does that lift your hips up and raise your center of gravity, which makes you more likely to be rolled off or flipped off, but it makes him much more uncomfortable when you're sitting right here on his chest or diaphragm, right? It'll interfere with his breathing, make it a lot more difficult for him to defend your attack. Once we have a good mount position established, we can start looking for the choke. Obviously, if your opponent is doing nothing with his hands, or if he's really inexperienced and he's hugging around your back or something, then the path to his neck is wide open and we can just whack an arm in. But usually, especially now that guys are getting a bit wiser with jiu-jitsu, he's going to be defending his neck with his arms. So we need to figure out a way to get a grip in. You usually put your strongest hand in first, your dominant hand. For me, it's my right hand, so that's what I'm going to use. Now, there's two ways to do it. The first is I can come underneath. So with that, I'm going to open the lapel and slide my hand using a knife or a blade underneath, nice and deep to get a good grip. The second way, which I've had more success with, is I look at whichever arm of his is on top, and I'm going to mirror that arm. So I'm going to go from elbow to elbow and wrist to wrist. Then I pull my elbow towards my stomach and I put my body weight onto his arm to push his arm down and his hand down away from his neck. That will start to weaken his defense straight away. So Jason's defending his neck. It's hard for me to get a grip in here. Maybe I can't come underneath. He's defending correctly, so I put my arm on top of his arm, my wrist on top of his wrist. Then, very important, I put my elbow in and I use my body weight to start pushing his hand down, weakening it, and being able to get my hand inside for the choke. What's really important is how you take this first grip. If your hand is not positioned correctly, your wrist will not be positioned correctly. What we're looking for is to have this bone, the extension of the thumb here, I think it's called the radial bone. You want it nice and tight up against his neck. The way I find to do that is once I have my hand in there, I'm looking to put my knuckles on the ground and to have my palm facing away from me. So if I do that, my palm facing out to the side, it's not going to be strong. But if it's facing forwards, that will mean that my wrist has been turned and it's right up against his neck. So let's watch. He's defending the choke. I've got my feet tucked in. I've sat my weight down into him, so I've got a good stable base. I want to get my dominant grip in. So I go elbow to elbow, wrist to wrist, pull my elbow in to push his elbow down, and then I use my weight to take his hand out. Slide my hand in, and I get a nice deep grip against his neck. From here, I want to start looking for the second grip. But now what most people do, the way they make a mistake is they start reaching here or here. And then what happens is the opponent traps your arm. Now with both arms out of the equation, you're stuck, right? If he bridges, you're going to fall. So instead of getting greedy and trying to put the second grip in straight away, what you're going to do is first get a base. And the way you do that is this. My free hand I'm going to put on the floor, and I'm going to put my head where he could roll me. Now, the way he could roll me is that way. If he tries to roll me this way, he's not thinking properly, because if he rolls me here, my hand stops me. The way he wants to roll me is that way, right? Here, now I've got nothing to stop me. So what I do, free hand here, and I put my head on the floor. From here, there's no way he can roll me off, right? He can bridge all day long. There's no way I'm going to get rolled off. Once I have my base, I bring this arm around, and I put my elbow on top of his head. From there, I grab my thumb inside his collar and take a super strong grip. Guys, the grip is everything in chokes. What you need to do with this choke is make sure that you're holding with your fingers. If you're holding like this on his lapel, with a crappy grip like that, you're not going to choke him, I guarantee. Make sure your fingers are being pulled in. If you're struggling to do that, it's because your hands are weak, right? Sorry to break it to you, it's what it is. Do some grip training or grip strengthening exercises. So once I have the second grip in, I'm going to shave his face with my forearm to get my wrist underneath his jaw, right? Especially if the guy is defending and he's keeping his chin tucked in tight, you can just wiggle, wiggle, wiggle and get it in under his jaw. Once I have this position here to finish the choke, all the power comes from my center. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my elbows into that lock-in position that we spoke of earlier. And then from there, I'm going to use my body weight to do the choke. So it's not a question of tugging and squeezing and pulling with your arms. You will have a firm grip, but all the power and the pressure on his neck is going to come from your body weight. So you're going to lean your weight forwards into him. Once you have your grips, you just lean in, put your head on the floor, and your body weight will cause him to tap.